So good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here today. And Agile and Enterprise Agile is really popular and a buzzword these days. So the purpose of today's presentation, which is generated from a project that was completed in the year 2012. So you'll see some data from 2011 and 2012. Again, you'll notice that I spent from my bio 2013 at Walmart.com at an Agile transition. But then I'm back at this client that I focused this presentation on. So the topic today is why is Enterprise Agile different? And if you notice, these are interesting little gray people that are aliens with one upside down and a different color. So I picked this image on purpose because much of what you read about in today's, oops, I'm on the wrong slide. Okay. Much of what you read about today about Agile and being a Scrum Master can be easily acquired from doing some Google searches and asking your friends and talking to your community or your meetup network group about what it's like. You won't be able to find too many people, but if you're lucky you are, find some people who've worked at some organizations that are actually enterprise level. And I'll tell you more about that as this presentation goes by. So what I hope that you walk away with today are some key aspects of what would make you successful in an Enterprise Agile shop or house or however you call it, company, how it's going to be a little different from what Scrum Masters are, and then some feedback on some challenges on how to get better for those of you who are already participating or for those of you who want to transition. So what this slide shows that you see right now is just a few overview items about why we put this together. So again, I mentioned, what truly happens at an Enterprise Agile and how to be successful, so we'll talk about that today. Also, how it's going to be different than being a Scrum Master. But ideally, this presentation was actually designed to be interactive, so it's been adapted for this webinar. So the first few slides, I'm going to cover in a different perspective and how it was originally delivered. As you can see, we polled the audience originally and asked them what they thought about how it was different. So we gave them Post-its, and we asked them for just 2 or 3 words. So in the next slide, you'll see some bubble diagrams on what they said. And here you see them now. I'll cover a few of these just to give you an example. So when we polled the audience, what we got back were a couple of key terms. One, I'd like to focus on a little later. When you read it, you'll see. In the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see rolling wave planning. That's the term that's from PMI, and in the end, right, project management frameworks get blended. So you'll see me use that a little later in a different term, and I'll be sure to point that out for you. In addition, what was important that we saw from our audience when we polled them was self-management of teams, iterative implementation, and deliver faster. So those are the key things I'd like you to keep in your mind as we go through the rest of this presentation. In going to the next slide, I wanted to let you know that there are 5 key things that I'm going to be covering today, which emphasize the difference for Enterprise Agile. And the last thing that I'm going to cover is some challenges that we have. Those 5 key things that make Enterprise Agile different at this leading San Francisco Bay Area retailer who has a 7-year-old framework and is still optimizing today are enterprise roles and basic principles, enterprise level cadence, collaboration versus collaboration. You notice those are in entirely caps, communication with a megaphone, and release of multiple products. Lastly, I'll cover the challenges. With that, our first topic is enterprise roles and basic principles. So I know that many of you on the phone have great knowledge about Agile, and with that, there are some tweaks, right, from the titles that you see here based on what we know. This enterprise that I'm talking about has a rare role of a chief agilist. This person is put in place so that when you're looking for guidance, there is a sounding voice that gives you guidance that's being delivered over the entire enterprise. Mind you, this organization that I'm talking about has over 500 IT professionals and has multiple brands and multiple campuses where people are working not only cross locations, but actually cross countries and time zones. So that role is so imperative to the success of their Enterprise Agile because it gives it unification and one person to actually be the sounding board. Because as we know, Agile can grow and has its own interpretations. So in order to give it structure, there's a chief agilist. Secondly, a role that you're familiar with if you're an agilist, which is the product manager. This role isn't much different than what you know, except for occasionally they have to follow what the business says and is not necessarily directly the business owner. So therein lies the combination of a product manager who's also the business analyst from the business flow perspective. Not truly the person who owns the decision, but the person who coordinates with the people who own the decision. We all know what project managers are in bullet 3, and from this perspective, this role has boundaries. So at this enterprise, project managers do budgeting, forecasting, collaboration externally from the team, and general communication with vendors, vendor management. They don't do resource management because the solution architect, which is also a technical manager, owns the technical resources. So bullet 4 is probably interesting to you because this iteration manager title has been coined mostly by this enterprise that we're talking about. They, for some reason, don't like the word Scrum Master because they've added some other duties that the Scrum Master, in the traditional sense, doesn't do. So, Iteration Manager, a.k.a. Scrum Master. I mentioned again that there is a Solution Architect. So, Solution Architect, as you think about it in the normal IT industry, has the responsibility of unifying architecture and solutions across projects so that there is balance and so that there is compliance to a higher level design. This person is not a full-time role on the project, but is a leadership role. Lastly, the release manager, which is, again, a modified role because it's not only a release manager in the sense of what we know in project manager as the one that coordinates in the end, but this release manager is belonging to an entity that serves the entire enterprise and interacts with teams at every iteration for their iterative release. So, you may be familiar with all these titles. They each have their nuances for Agile at this enterprise to make it successful. You probably have lots of questions at this point regarding these roles, and I look forward to answering them towards the end. There are some other base assumptions that happen at this enterprise: multiple teams, sharing code base, and interfacing with waterfall. So let me touch on what that means briefly. Multiple teams is pretty intrinsic in what it means, but the twist here is that the multiple team structure is that you may have, as a Scrum Master, 80% of your team dedicated to you so that you can move swiftly, but most likely 20% of your team is shared with another team doing the same role. So let me give an example of that. A team member that would be 20% of your team that's shared, perhaps, is a network engineer because you have to interface with some of the environments or infrastructure. In this case, for my team, there were two. One was for direct network